Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. The first item on the work session is the Eastern Panhandle Expansion Project. Brooke Harper.
Sit here.
That's fine, yes.
All right. So my name is Brooke Harper. I'm a resident of Hagerstown, Maryland, and I'm also the Maryland, D.C. Policy Director for Chesapeake Climate Action Network. And I wanted to speak with you today about the Eastern Panhandle Expansion Project, which will be a frac gas pipeline that will be running from Pennsylvania underneath the Potomac River for 3 miles through the outskirts of Hancock, about 1.5 miles outside of town, and then through West Virginia. And we've raised several concerns with the Maryland Department of Environment because we feel that they are not doing a thorough review to safeguard our water sources and as well as to protect our community. We've had a really groundswell of support across the state, including from our own Washington County Board of County Commissioners who have written to Governor Hogan citing their concerns over several issues, including karst geology, which I'll go into in a little bit, as well as how they're not really looking at the full 401 certification and urging them to do that, to look at how this project would impact our drinking water, as well as how the hydraulic directional drilling method that they plan to utilize, would that cause potential blowouts and things like that. Boonesboro also submitted a letter to Governor Hogan requesting that they actually deny the 401 certification, which they haven't agreed to take up yet, as well as Montgomery County and Prince George's County and the District of Columbia Council have all issued letters to Governor Hogan. I'm here today on a personal capacity as well as a professional capacity, just to let you learn a little bit more about the proposed project and to cite our concerns and also to answer any questions that you may have, and ultimately to see if this council would also issue a letter to Governor Hogan stating your concerns over the project. So you should have one of these.
Do you have any more of those?
I don't, I'm sorry, I apologize.
Because the mayor does not have one, the administrator.
Great. So this project is in its entirety, it's actually 2 projects, 1 pipeline. So you have the Trans-Canada portion, which is on the Pennsylvania and Maryland side, and then you have the Mountaineer gas portion, which picks up in West Virginia. On our side, it would deliver frac gas from Pennsylvania, and it crosses state borders, so it must get approval from FERC, which is our Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Thus far, they've not done a full environmental impact assessment, which is what we asked them to do, to look at the full impacts of the project. They've just recently issued an environmental assessment that did not take into consideration the karst geology of our region. And for those of you that aren't familiar, karst geology is really porous, has a lot of fissures and limestone. If you've ever been to Crystal Grottos before and taken a tour of that cave, that's basically what they want to run a frac gas pipeline through, is that type of geology. The second project, the second pipeline, is the West Virginia connection. And that would be powered by Mountaineer gas. They've started to stake out the property and begun to clear land. The only permit that was required on the West Virginia side was a general stormwater permit. It didn't consider the following, so mitigation or avoidance measures for geologically sensitive karst areas. There's no description of stream bank restoration and stabilization are included in the application, and no water quality monitoring is proposed. And they should be installed at each of the stream crossings, similar to efforts in Virginia. In Virginia, who's also, you've probably heard, facing 2 major pipelines being constructed, they've asked the companies to do a 401 certification to look at each of the individual streamways and waterways that it'll cross. And on the Maryland side, we've actually recently found out that Maryland Department of Environment has actually waived its authority and its permit to look at how the horizontal directional drilling will actually impact the area underneath the Potomac River. So for us, it's an immediate concern for 100,000 residents in Berkeley and Washington County. If there was a spill or a blowout during construction, how will we safeguard our water and how will we safeguard our citizens? And then Here's just some pictures of the clearings that have to happen when you construct a pipeline. The one that's in our area is not quite this large. As you can see on the previous slide, it's only gonna be about 3 inches in diameter. But on each side, it's a clearing of 75 feet that they need to spray pesticides on and ensure that area is clear. And then on the next page, this is of a recent spill in Ohio, the Rover spill, where they've actually been ordered to stop construction. And you can see that it's permanently destructed a wetland where they had bentonite drilling mud for that happened during the horizontal directional drilling.
Do you know that?
Huh?
Where that is at, that would be in West Virginia.
Can you explain what you mean by a spill during the construction? When we hear spills, we think of a pipeline that's busted and everything's going out, but you're describing a spill while they're building the pipeline. Can you explain that to us?
So if like the drilling fluid gets mixed into our groundwater, so while they're drilling through, like if there's a spill of all the fluids that they're putting in there to construct it. And so when you look at that picture,
Understood.
that's some of like the bentonite drilling fluid that's been contaminated.
My name is Brett Wells, Upper Potomac Riverkeeper, and I've been working with Brooke on this campaign. Essentially, she's right, the hydraulic drilling process uses slick mud water to pressurize with a drill bit.
Okay.
And sometimes that pressurizing water will find a way out and up to the surface, which is called the blowout. And that created that 2 million gallon blowout in that Ohio wetland. And if a 2 million gallon blowout were to occur underneath the Potomac River or Tunnelway Creek, that would have significant impacts.
Certainly.
So you're talking about while you're drilling under the
Right.
creek or under the river, this could occur.
Yes.
Are there examples of where this has been done in the past, where they've actually went under the Potomac River or any place with any kind of pipelines?
So there are actual gas pipelines underneath the Potomac River, but not through the porous karst geology, which is of major concern, which our Maryland Department of Environment is not considering in their permit application. And then on this page, you can see this is the route that it'll pass through, and you can see that the blue areas are the karst geology that it'll pass through.
We've had, Kristen, would you say we've not had some significant experience with, we have Superfund site. We've had a lot of studies done by EPA in the cleanup of the groundwater. And you don't have to convince at least the two of us that have seen these studies of how far this stuff will go in this area. I mean, we have it coming out, what, down at City Park, is that right, Kristen?
That site actually goes up to Haven.
Yeah, you're talking about runoff that comes from the railroad that goes to the city park.
No, I'm talking about,
When they put the dye in at the
talking about
Superfund
putting the
site,
dye in at Superfund site,
Yeah, it
comes out at
goes-
City Park.
it also goes all the way up north toward, what is that, Rest Haven? It comes out at that area. So, is your objective in seeking these letters of support for opposition to this project to stop the project or to ensure that additional precautionary regulatory measures are taken?
To ensure the MDE uses its full authority and demands a 401, so we can safeguard the process.
So is your objective to stop the pipeline from being constructed, or is it to make sure that it's constructed as safely as possible?
If we can't stop the pipeline, then we do want to take all of the precautions that are necessary, which for us is looking at the 401, safeguarding our drinking water, and making sure that each of the individual streamways and waterways are looked at. And that's what, some councils have asked for straight to oppose the pipeline. Others were just asking, can you ask the Maryland Department of Environment and Hogan administration to do the full 401 process and to have TransCanada submit a full application for that.
And just a little background, we went through this about a year ago in the town of Myersville that I manage, where Dominion came through and they had to put in a compression station, a large station that was constructed with about a half-mile pipeline in and out to an existing pipeline that's there from the 70s. So I have what I feel is pretty significant experience as it applies to the FERC process. One of the things that we learned in that deliberation was, number one, FERC is under the authority of the president. We could give you our letters, Congress could give you a letter from every Congress member out there. And the reality is FERC is a unilateral entity that makes that decision. And for all of these matters, and about 95% of those decisions are approved without condition, through the process, and about 5% of them usually get some type of conditions applied. And so that's why I asked, what your ultimate goal is, because my experience with FERC is that's probably not a logical outcome to expect. And the other thing that you can expect is, to these entities, time is money, and depending on the measures in which you attempt to withhold approval of the project, will depend on to what degree you're interested in expending funds for legal services, because that happens. And the courts I've found, especially as it applies to these FERC applications, certainly side on the energy entities side, because like it or not, they're not subject to local regulatory requirements. They're not subject to county regulatory requirements. And I think the hardest thing for folks to understand is they're not really subject to state regulatory measures.
One of the mechanisms that the state does have the authority to have, Virginia has exercised it, New York has exercised it, is that they can require a full 401, and that's what we're asking our state to do. Yes.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, for review, but they do have the power to deny a federal project.
And FERC has the ability to overrule that denial.
But it's also been done
Right.
successfully in New York twice.
Right, but I think two comments I would have is, one, there's certainly nothing to lose to try to fight this. Two, I would just note, unless somebody is going to explain to me the benefits to our citizens of this pipeline, the only thing I know possible effect that could have would be a detrimental one on our water system. I don't know of any positive things that can come out of it. I don't know that we're getting paid a lot of money for a pipeline to go under our water supply. And I think if nothing else, this is just another example of stating that we have been correct in saying that we keep Edgemont and not get rid of it.
So, and maybe my last point is, one of the other things that I was able to sort of learn through that process was that the only entity that can really trump a federal decision-making authority is another federal decision-making authority. And so I'd be interested to understand, given that dynamic and the fact that this is going to go through areas in which other federal regulatory entities have some authority, namely the National Park Service here, in other words, if I were looking for an entity to lean on to apply pressure to this particular project, or any FERC-regulated project, it would be another federal entity, whether that be, federal highways, whether that be National Park Service, whether that be, FEMA. And so I'd be curious if or if not, and why not, those particular federal agencies have not been engaged to oppose it on those.
So we have engaged the Army Corps of Engineers, we've engaged the National Park Service, and we're asking our local officials to also engage at the state level so that they can use their full authority. So
Has the National Park Service issued any level of opposition at this point?
No, we've asked them to hold a public hearing, they've denied that.
They have?
Yes.
Yeah,
I've been unresponsive.
Just think who their cabinet secretary is. I mean, who's kidding who? I mean, that's like asking the EPA right now to do something. You're asking National Park Service and the EPA, the federal government, to actually uphold park services or the environment and expect that they're gonna do it.
Well, I know that's part of the reason that the one that I'm familiar with was moved from one location
That's
within the
back in
Middletown
the-
Valley to another.
That's back in the days when regulations
This was
were a
3
good
years
thing.
ago.
Well, that's before regulations were horrible, and we have to get rid of every regulation. I
Yeah,
mean,
well-
God forbid that we should worry about drinking water when we have
I
a
just find it
pipeline
odd
to
that,
deal with.
that another federal entity doesn't have an interest in applying their,
But don't they have to follow the guidelines of their bosses? And the boss of the National Park Service, I mean, their main objective seems to be to give away parkland right now, not to save it. And the EPA, being run by somebody who tried to sue to shut it down, that's what we're up against. That's why I think this is probably beating our head against the walls, but I certainly would be happy for us to approve this.
yeah, I don't have any opposition to supporting a letter that says the state should be doing what it's supposed to be doing. I don't have any interest in signing a letter opposing this. Let's make it clear, for me, but I don't have any opposition either of saying, hey, state, you should be applying, those review measures that you do have at your disposal, as diligently as we, as citizens of the state, expect you to do. But at the same token, I'm just here to let folks know that I've been through this and, at least enough to understand that you could have 10,000 people show up, with big signs waving, and FERC is independently able to approve it, irregardless.
May I provide an alternate deck for the letter? One of the issues, besides outright denying it as a project itself, over expressing their concerns, we have a year time deadline for the state to make a decision on this current application that it has, and the current application to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. We don't have all the information about the effects that the Mountaineer gas pipeline will have on Maryland water resources. So if there's a spill at the Trans-Canada pipeline, it could affect the water intake here for Washington County. If there's a spill on the Mountaineer gas pipeline on Bat Creek, that could also affect Washington County's drinking water supply. But we have no information about what that company is doing. Now, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission could assume and gather that information upon the request of the state. They could. That is a possibility. That is within their rights to be able to request that. And until that information is available to the state, our suggestion to the governor is deny the 401 certification right now until you have all the information completely, the entire package, to make a safe decision.
I think that comes back to saying we think that the state should carry out its due diligence, to the level it's expected. I don't have any interest in engaging FERC to ask them to do things above and beyond what our own state isn't interested in doing. That to me doesn't make a lot of.
I greatly appreciate a letter of support asking the state to do a thorough 401 review for this project.
Well, that's just me.
No, I
There's 4 other people here.
The safety.
What are we deciding on? What do we decide?
We are asking the state to do its due diligence in 401 review, and I think we're specifically asking them to take into consideration specifically the geology of this area and the potential effects on the water supply to our citizens. That from the state?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I mean, we'll have to look at the wording and,
There's gotta be one version in here from one of these other entities that reads similar.
Or you may want to send us a suggestion,
I'd be happy to.
knowing what we're interested in doing. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you for the river keepers. Very familiar.
Excellent, thank you.
Michelle, you're up for the fiscal year 19 general fund budget status review.
Clean funds. There we go.
So excited.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Donna was kind enough to make extra copies, and hopefully everybody got a copy now. So I think, actually, before I begin to cover and do a budget review, I just want to go through the process, because I think sometimes it's easy for me to put this number out here and the headline says, ooh, the city of Hagerstown has a $2.7 million deficit.
Well, that's what it's gonna be.
Well, but that's not what I'm saying, okay? So I'm here right now, our budget process, our budget starts typically in November. The accounting group, my department, starts looking at payroll. We start working with HR and the city administrator to review where we are with contracts, benefit changes, and staffing levels, anything that has occurred on that side throughout the year. The month of December, the individual departments have from December 1st to December 31st to complete and send back two different things. First, their capital improvement requests, and that isn't just for one specific year, it's to span 5 years. So they do that, and in addition to that, by the end of December 31st, they key and actually initiate what they would like to see within their own budgets. Again, separate from the payroll and the staffing side, because my department typically handles that. Once December is over, the month of January, we spend about 3 weeks, 3 solid weeks. The city administrator, myself, and then my budget and accounting manager, who is sitting in the back, her name is Jennifer Peterson. First couple weeks on the job, she got to sit through all these budget review meetings with everybody to meet everybody the hard way. But we spend 3 weeks, and we sit with every individual department. We review their capital requests first, get a status of where they're currently running in fiscal year 18, where they think they're going to be by the end of fiscal year 18, and then also discuss their fiscal year 19 and an additional 4 years out, what it is that they feel that they need, what's the most pressing and what's the priority. After we wrap up those meetings, we start the process all over again with all the individual departments to review everything that they have put in for their operating budget needs. So that's January, and we're sitting here and it's February 6th. So basically, at this point in time, what I have in my system is everything that everybody initially requested. I'm providing a snapshot only of where we are in our process. So as of Friday, when I run all the reports, in the general fund, we are currently at a 2.687 deficit, meaning that what we have entered and requested in fiscal year 19 expenses exceeds our revenue at this time only. So February and March is I don't want to say the fun part, but it's, yes, sometimes battle lines are drawn. And actually, I don't want to say that, because every single department manager is very proactive and very good. When we come back and say, this is what we need, everybody volunteers. So for the next couple of weeks through till the end of February, we will be working on getting that 2.687 deficit down to 0. The month of March, my entire department will work on preparing our budget document so that it's ready per our charter and in your mailboxes before we leave on March 31st. So again, tonight is just to provide an overview of where we currently are. It's not reflective of where we're going to be. I'll cover the things that are currently in these numbers, but just like we say to the departments when we sit and do their budget, you know, this is what's here right now. There's no guarantee what will be there by March 31st. And then April through the end of May, this body then has that document and reviews and has their opportunity to make changes, ask questions. And then by the end of May, we introduce the ordinance so that our new budget is effective by July 1. And by our charter, I think that has to be done by May 31st, because we have to make sure that it's done.
The budget
30 days.
and the
Yes.
tax rates have to be set.
Correct, that is part of it. So the city of Hagerstown, there's many different funds and many different groups. This evening, what I decided to do, actually a little bit because of where we were last fiscal year at this time when I sat down, I gave an update of all the funds. And the reality of it is there is very little change in the electric, water, wastewater, and parking funds. Three out of four of those, actually, water and wastewater, have a 5-year rate study. We already know and can project where the revenues were going to be. Their expenses really haven't changed. And they are self-sustaining from the individual charges that they are doing to their individual customers. So I thought really and truly to spend the most time is looking at just the general fund. And again, with recognizing that we have additional and new members, so welcome. I think sometimes to give too much information is a little overwhelming, and all the funds all at once are quite cumbersome. But I think if we concentrate on the general fund, which is the one that's supported by the property tax revenue, is probably well worth our effort. And again, not saying that what we currently have in here, that any of these are going to stay. So in the packet, provided a chart. The top of the chart just shows the revenue, or the sources of our revenue for the general fund by different categories. And literally just comparing and showing the difference from fiscal year 19 working budget to our approved fiscal year 18 budget, so our current year budget. So it's budget to budget comparisons. The top of the chart is the revenue and the sources. The bottom chart is expenses, how we're going to use the fundings and the monies that we have. So right now, fiscal year 19 general fund, we're looking at about $44.2 million in revenue, which is an increase over the fiscal year 18 budget amount of about $44 million. So while that's an increase and that's good news, it's only 0.4% increase. When we look at the bottom chart, our expenses, you can see, are going right now in the working budget 46.8 or 46.9 million compared to just about 44 million in fiscal year 18. That increase is a 6.6% increase. So right now we're looking at our revenue growth being about $200,000, but our expenditure growth right now being about 2.9 million. So when you do the math, revenue minus expenses, we're looking at about $2.678 million deficit. I don't want to say that we had the magic crystal ball. This number is very, very close, and actually when we did our budget last year, on the operating side, there's a section for financial projections, and it is also a 5-year look. When we sat here in April and May, and even in the approved budget, when we looked at fiscal year 19, we were anticipating to have over a $2 million deficit based on where we currently were. So I guess before we go any further, that pretty much tells us that where we thought we were going to be based on where current services and items that we provide, infrastructure and services that we provide, is actually where we are currently running. So the plus and the positive here is where I'm at right now. There is no significant changes right in our working budget for services or anything else that hasn't yet been approved by this body, okay? It's the good news and the bad news, I guess. The biggest areas so far that we're seeing in the working budget, and I know it's always a question, but right now with property tax revenues, I am showing that it's going to increase over fiscal year 18 budget by about $1.2 million. And I just want to caution us that I do not yet have our constant yield notice from the state assessor's office, and I'm anticipating to hopefully have that usually right around February 12th through February 15th is the window. So we will be in our second year of our triennial assessment. When we go back and we look at the charts in comparison of our second year, typically all things being the same, we see a slight growth in our assessable base, or about 2%. So really what I've done is looked at where we're actually running in our current fiscal year, and in fiscal year 18, we are actually trending higher than what our fiscal year 18 budget was, so that's a good thing. But I'm anticipating that that's going to increase by another 2% for fiscal year 19. Again, that's just based on our historical trends. We do not yet have the state assessor's constant yield notice. In addition, that number does not include any property tax rate changes of any kind. It does not include a tier tax rate. It is simply where we currently are at 94.1 cents per $100 of assessed value, and the same with the personal property tax as well. So the good news is there, I think when we received our fiscal year 18 constant yield notice, we were all a little surprised at the large number that was estimated that we were going to see in our appeals. And I think the reality of what has happened is our appeals haven't been quite as large as what was originally estimated by the state assessor's office, which is a good thing. Other than that, on the revenue side in the general fund right now, really, we're not including any new and additional revenue sources for any programs that haven't already been approved. We do have the red light camera program within our fiscal year 19 working budget, but again, that program has been approved. We're currently in the process, actually we're in February, so we're currently in the process of our 1-month trial period on a couple of those intersections and those cameras, and they will go live then next month. One of the other big areas other than the revenue, and sometimes on the budget side in the revenue, is fund balance reserves. And if we in the budget world decide to use fund balance reserves, that is actually seen as a funding source. In our fiscal year 18, the current budget, we had indicated that we would utilize up to $1.3 million in our fund balance reserves. Now, not all of that was for capital improvement projects. Some of that money was monies that was already committed and obligated through some old incentive programs that we had. So it was just a continuation of those programs, paying out what was already obligated. In the working budget right now, I have about $570,000 in general fund balance reserves. That amount, there's one incentive that isn't quite, it's obligated, $250,000 obligation that's already been committed in prior years. We have not yet spent that money. In our working budget, I'm indicating that we're going to utilize that plus a little bit more. So when we did our fiscal year 18 budget, there were certain capital infrastructure projects that we were going to utilize fund balance reserves. There's a handful of those projects that aren't actually going to be done and completed until the next fiscal year. So because we've already set aside and earmarked the funding source, I've continued that into the fiscal year 19 budget. One of the things, and I think it's easiest to see it on the chart in the very, very back. So prior Mayor and Council had set aside $1.5 million for an incentive program. And that program was very successful, and everybody utilized those incentives. We have one remaining $250,000 that's been committed for a Class A office building. In the working budget right now, I'm including the potential to redirect that prior commitment and utilize it towards our urban improvement project. Just because we've been receiving so many different requests for funding beyond our original $1.5 million that we had in there. Our $1.5 million breakdown so far, we did $500,000 for the Maryland Theater towards their architectural and design. We have another $1 million in there, and then we're receiving requests that go beyond that amount. So what I'm showing is general fund agency contributions in this very last chart, and I'm showing some actual history so you can see where we've spent the money. And this body every year in October has, since we implemented the new policy, has given us about $195,000 to $205,000 that we're going to set aside and utilize for these 8 key organizations. So in fiscal year 18 approved budget, you'll see those key 8 groups that have been identified for funding, to receive funding at the very top. And then the other thing we did was we set aside $10,000 so that Mayor and Council could use at their discretion as additional requests came forward. In the fiscal year 19 budget column, I'm going to go further to the left. This group already approved last October for a total of $205,000. You'll see I have $405 there. The difference being giving $200,000 additional to the Maryland Theater in light of their request for us to fund some additional monies towards their fundraising campaign. And in looking at maybe what we could do, if we pledged and made a commitment to the Maryland Theater over a period of 4 years, we could do an initial $200,000 in the fiscal year 19 budget if we utilize fund balance reserve and this body and group is willing to redirect that fund balance reserve from what we previously committed it for an economic incentive program to the Maryland Theater for the urban improvement project.
So when you say that's committed, was that committed to a project that already has happened or something in the future?
Class A office building.
Okay, which is nowhere
Correct.
close
So,
to being, coming to fruition.
correct. I'm not saying that we would no longer honor that
No, I
obligation,
understand.
but what I'm saying is, so we're sitting here, and I think that this body, you know, the mayor will say to me quite often, Michelle, you have that $250,000, it's not ready to go. And I know that it's not ready to go, but we actually solicited through a formal request for qualifications, and within that letter of request for a private developer to work with us and come forward, we had offered up $250,000. So I was showing that still set aside as committed. But what I'm saying is, at this point in time for fiscal year 19, I don't have a large enough additional funding sources in order to give to the Maryland Theater. So if we redirect it and give it to the Maryland Theater for fiscal year 19 budget, we will at the same time have to acknowledge and understand that we still have that $250,000 future obligation that we're gonna have to start building back into our budget the following year or the year after that. And if we would decide that, to give the Maryland Theater more than $200,000, one of the possibilities we could do is another $100,000 over another 3 years. That total would be $500,000. Really, at this point in time, I can't keep saying we're gonna go and use fund balance reserve for that. So one of the things that we would do is reallocate all of our general fund agency contributions from these other agencies in order to give it to the Maryland Theater for the project, saying that that was our priority and we recognized it and we wanted to provide funding, but the only way to get it through operations on an annual basis was to do it in this manner. The other one that I think has come and done a presentation is the Washington County Art Museum, and I know that they've been very successful in their fundraising efforts for their new HVAC project. And they've been following up with us. If we wanted to do $10,000 a year for a 3-year period, or a total of $30,000, what I would recommend is we basically don't have an unspecified, undesignated amount in the future years, and that we would just add that to the other operating amounts that we're giving to the museum. Again, that's what's in their working budget at this time. I'm not saying that it will completely stay there, but as we continue to fine tune and work our way through, I'm not sure. I mean, I know the Maryland Theater has that request of us. I know they're looking for more than $20,000. I'm just not sure where to find another significant funding source at this point.
So just to clarify, Michelle, make sure I'm understanding the way we're proposing this. So the first $200,000 in fiscal year 19 would be out of that redirecting the fund balance reserve from the $250,000 committed, leaving about $50,000 if something would get started with the project. Then for fiscal years 20, or as long as council would want, we could go out 3 more years, even taking $100,000, but taking it from the agency contribution. So we have to reallocate it from the other organizations. Okay.
Correct.
So we could possibly propose about $500,000 to the Maryland Theater
Over a 4-year period.
over a 4-year period through this process.
Correct.
Okay.
So general fund revenue, fund balance reserves. Next, we're going to move into the expense side. And to talk about expenses, by far, one of the largest expenses is in our wages and our benefits. So just to kind of go through the salary enhancements and what is currently included in this working budget. Just a reminder that we have a total of 4 different collective bargaining unions. We have a full-time employee, non-union group, and then separate from those full-time 5 employee groups, we also have part-timers and seasonals. So for 3 of our 4 bargaining unions, we have contracts in place through June 2022. So the plus side there is that for those employees in those groups, we already know what we've previously committed through fiscal year '22. The only bargaining unit that we do, that is set to expire in June of 2018 is our firefighters, our 1605 International Association of Firefighters, and those negotiations are soon to start. I did, at this point in this working budget, include salary enhancements for all employee groups, and that's union, non-union, full-time, part-time, seasonal. And one of the things to consider with our part-time and seasonals, we have a significant number of seasonals that we utilize within Public Works and Parks and Rec. There are many of them that what we were paying at the end of the calendar year last year is going to be under the new minimum wage requirements, $10.10 starting in July. So also within this budget, we're recognizing that that bump has to occur. Just to go through, we're looking at about $1.2 million more in salary enhancements in fiscal year 19 budget when you compare it to the fiscal year 18 budget.
The majority of which is because of,
Approved contracts already in place.
it's not because of these other things, like the minimum wage adjustment or
Some
the
of it.
sick.
The
That's what I'm
majority
trying
of,
to figure
the
out.
majority of it's
Majority
the
it
contracts,
is
yes.
from union contracts.
Correct.
It's not from these other state mandated
Correct.
items.
So the first contract, 1540 ASME union, so that union actually crosses all funds, general funds and all the utility funds. Per their approved contract, they get a 1% COLA on July 2nd. They get 1 step increase on their anniversary date, and they have a brand-new step 25 longevity step added. Our 3373 AFSCME is our police, our sworn police group, and they are strictly within the general fund. And per that approved contract, they're going to move to the step that the longevity step they should be based on years of service as soon as July 2nd hits. Their steps will then become unfrozen, and so many within that group will move an additional step in fiscal year 19 based on their anniversary date. So they'll be back on track and moving on longevity going forwards. IBEW, that is our smallest union group, and it is strictly our electrical workers and all within the electric fund, but they get a 2% COLA on July 2nd. Last, we will have full-time, we have non-union group and the firefighters, and we have allocated a pool of funds to allow for salary enhancements, hopefully for both of those groups, and that's to be determined because we recognize and we realize we have to have some money to start good faith negotiations. Last, as I mentioned, part-time positions and seasonal positions. I shouldn't just say part-time. But the wage increase is going to go to $10.10. And we do have some of our part-time regular staff who's under that $10.10 minimum wage. Staffing, so the actual number of people and bodies. I have not included, nor has our city administrator permitted any department to add any new full-time positions that has not already previously been approved. So the numbers, the breakdown, 452 funded full-time positions. 317 of those are in the general fund, 135 in all the other funds. That number has not changed from the prior year or the year before that. In addition to the funded positions, we have 25 unfunded positions. 14 of those are in the general fund and 11 in all the others. While we did not allow anybody to increase their staff, at this time we have not, in the working budget, including any reduction or changes in the makeup of the full-time positions either. The next big area, and typically, quite frankly, it's odd to be sitting here at this point, and the department managers all heard me say it. It's very rare that I can sit and say our health insurance, our third-party administrators come back, and they have told us 0% increase from where we currently are to fiscal year 19 budget. Typically, at this point, we're looking at a 9% increase, we're looking at a 7% increase. So that was huge right now, because we would be starting further backwards if that were the case. And just so that, because I know not everybody is used to these numbers yet, but we have, in the general fund only, not any of the employees and any of the other funds, but $4.6 million in the general fund in health insurance expense, $3.2 million for active employees, $1.4 for our retirees. And again, that's with no increase in our employer contribution over our current fiscal year 18 levels. Again, another positive is on the dental side. Again, no increase. It is much smaller in dollar amount, $135,000, and that's to cover actives and retirees. Pension costs. So we have two different pensions within the general fund. Police and fire pension projections. We are capping our contribution, our employer contribution, at 14% of salaries and wages. That's the same as our current year contribution amounts. But because the set increases in the salaries, that cost and that total dollars that we spend will go up. But it's 1.6 million total pension. That's not the increase. That's just simply the total number in the general fund that we're going to pay out for pension costs. And then I provided information there. So the city's doing 14% as an employer contribution. The employee's contribution rate in the current fiscal year is 7%, and it's been 7% since that program was implemented. State of Maryland pension rates. So this one is a little different in that it's not necessarily a city pension plan. This actually is mandated from the state of Maryland. They provide to us not just what our employee contribution has to be, but what the employer contribution has to be, and that is going from 8.56% of salaries up to 9%. And that looks like about $700,000 in employer contribution is what we're going to pay out. So far, some pretty good news in that our percentages aren't changing too much except for state of Maryland. However, we do have to go ahead and acknowledge that there is a new state legislation. And as of today, right now, that state legislation for paid sick leave would be in effect for us February 12th, because February 11th is a Sunday. But the new state legislation basically says any employee who averages 12 hours on a weekly basis must be paid a maximum of, or must be provided up to a maximum of 40 hours of paid sick leave. And this is different from what we currently do. Our part-timers nor our seasonal staff currently are receiving that type of a benefit. So our city administrator, Valerie, as well as Wendy, our HR director, has been working, and we've all met. Wendy is currently working on revising our policies, because this new state legislation doesn't just say, here's a new group you have to give it to. This new state legislation says things like, here's what family means, and here's the definition of family. It goes a little bit further. And so even our existing policy for our full-time employees are not as rich or as beneficial as maybe this new state mandated. So there's changes to our policy. We're working on it. It will come back as a separate topic and be presented to Mayor and Council in the coming weeks. But that, at the point of the working budget, had not included any additional costs on paid sick leave in our budget. So I will be working to adjust and include those numbers as well. Other than staffing, the next largest figure sometimes is our investments in our capital improvement projects and our infrastructure. And so for our capital improvement projects, it's important to note that a lot of the information that I'm including isn't everything that's being requested, because those infrastructure projects are large in nature. Some have a multitude of funding sources, state grants, highway user revenue. So what I'm looking at here is just the ones that would have the impact right now on balancing our general fund operating budget. So about 1.4 million currently exists in the working budget as a request that we would need pay-go funding or simply current year transfers in order to cover. To break that down just in really large segments, about 586,000 of that is for vehicles. About another 400,000 is for public safety, radios and equipment. And then the rest is all just a variety of infrastructure and parks. Again, some of them have multiple funding sources. Some of what is requested from the general fund is just simply a match, but that's how it breaks down currently. At this point, we are anticipating that we're going to have to come before this body and look at doing another bond issue. We have some very big and very large dollar projects, and one of the ways in which we can afford to do them is by doing a bond issue. We'll go through that more in detail as we have these projects ready to go. But it's entirely possible that I could be coming back in the next couple of weeks. We have a handful of projects, much smaller in scale. And one of the things I've been looking at and working with our bond council is maybe to move these 2 or 3 things forward and to get the funding in hand right now, that we do a different type of bond issue and we do it as a private placement. Just means the procedures for me are extremely different. What this body sees is pretty much the same. I'll come, I'll say, here's projects, here's what we need, is it okay to move forward? But again, more to come on that. Total right now, that's included in the working budget for our future, just out of the general fund, is about $6.5 million. And typically, we try to keep our bond issues at 20 years or less. In addition to these other things, one of the things that I really challenged the managers were when we looked at the current year, where their statuses were on these projects. Could they either defer? Could they not do a project so that they had funding to do something different? Kind of help prioritize. So I already, with the help of the departments, we've set aside about $500,000 that we're going to be able to do next year that was either deferred this year or by moving it like from one park to another. What is not included, just say there is no capital funds included in the working budget right now for a stadium or a sportsplex project. And that is on the capital side. We do have monies in our operating side for what's already been approved and what we're moving forward to do with the feasibility studies. Just to reiterate, did not have any changes or reductions to city services, no changes to events, no changes to recreation or the golf course, which is something that I feel that we probably need to revisit. Speaking of the golf course, we typically do a stipend every year from the general fund to the golf course so that they're one of the few separate funds that the charges for services do not cover their expenditures. And quite honestly, the golf course is seen more as an extension of our Parks and Rec. And I think at least one council member said, why don't we just fold it back into the general fund? And it's actually something that I'm looking to do. However, one of the things that has been happening in the last 2 years or more, and it's not unique to the city of Hagerstown, but it's a national trend, people playing golf is down. Our revenue is down. And what's happening is our stipend is increasing. And so if I fold the golf into the general fund, I feel like we won't be keeping a very close eye on how much we're doing as a stipend. So where we were doing about $200,000 a year, and that's what we had included in our budget, when we ended fiscal year 17, we actually had to transfer a little over $300,000. And so right now, I'm just looking at that, there's $300,000 we either give to maintain the golf course, or we could utilize for other infrastructure, crime cameras, vehicles, or somewhere else within our operating side. Again, just,
Then with the golf course.
I'm sorry.
And then we do what with the golf course? Would that mean shuttering the doors? Is that what that means? I mean, if we can't
Yes.
give it that money,
Yeah.
then it closes up.
Because to temporarily close the golf course for a year, we wouldn't really save money because the big expenditure items for the golf course, I mean, we don't have a lot of staff there. There's like 2 full-time staff. The biggest money is in maintaining the course itself. And so even if we close it for a year, and saying we were just gonna take a year off and then open it back the following year, we'd still have to maintain and pay all those other.
Just expenses.
Correct. And so those maintenance costs of keeping the greens,
But I think we've said over and over in this forum, you know, as publicly as we can possibly say, as long as we, you know, long before I got here, the golf course will never break even.
right,
The golf course needs 28 to 30,000 rounds a year to break even, and at its best, was like back in 2005, I think it did 17 or 18,000 rounds. It was still 10,000 rounds short, and it was about 90,000 short in breaking even. So it's just not going to happen. So, you know, as much as we've talked about the golf course and the ups and downs and the good and bad years, I've never seen this groundswell of public input to close its doors, to shut it down. Even when the city went out and even in the downtime of the golf course, when it was doing like 12,000 rounds a few years back, and you spent a bunch of money fixing the clubhouse up. Even then, the public didn't say, oh, you know, look, they're wasting money on that clubhouse. I've just never heard that sentiment from the public to close up shop on that place and put it up for sale.
and
We're not gonna close it and leave it sit there, right? We would
Correct.
close it
No.
and dispose of the property.
that would be my goal and direction, yes.
Otherwise, Eric's gonna be out
Put
there
it,
real
put
quick
it back on the
saying, you
tax
know,
rules,
Put a sports box there.
if you wanna deal with all of the land development costs that come along with that, sure. I mean, it's floodplain, it's significant terrain differential, it's on state highways, route for
But
accessibility.
there was a proposal one time to actually sell it to a group and have them run it, but there would still be some subsidized costs from the city of Hagerstown,
And at
which
that
would
time-
basically cut about in half of what we did this year.
I think at that time, 2 to 3 years ago, and Rodney can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was almost $200,000, which at the time was what our normal stipend was. And so yes, I understand historically.
Then it gets run in a manner where it looks bad. It's a very visible piece of property in this city. I mean, it's as visible as you can get. I'm definitely not about to hand it over to somebody else and say, hey, you know, good luck with it, and here's a little bit of money. And then people drive by it every day and look at that, you know, the city's, you know, running that.
I think it's worth another conversation to say, we understand that, and we know that we're gonna have to provide a stipend if we're gonna continue to have a golf course, but what is our max limit? So if it needs $500,000 each year, are we gonna keep it open? And so that's just a theoretical question, but it's it's that same question you've posed to us over and over about how far can we afford to go with the employer contribution match on pensions? Until we got to the 14%, and we tried to get, and the actuary came back and they said, with the way your pension is right now, here's your new percentage, and we went, oh, man, we can't, there is no way that we can do more than the 14% we're currently at.
Again, I haven't heard this groundswell of public interest in giving up on this very visible open space in our city. I realize the cost, you know, and I'll put it out there, I'm an avid golfer, I don't play this course, you know, hardly, but it has a physical presence within this community that I think has to be weighed fairly heavily before we just say, you know, disposal's the result.
Well, the flip side of that is, one, I don't think there's anybody conceivably would talk about not funding the golf course next year,
Right.
given the fact that it's now February and we're talking about May. But there's gotta be a time, in my opinion, when you say there's no groundswell for shutting it down, at one time when a conversation like this would take place, this place would get packed with people making sure that we knew we'd get thrown out of office if we got rid of the golf course. The same as with Melp, for those with long memories. And I'm just curious to see what the reaction is of the community when we get to budget time and we talk about the amount of money that the golf course is spending on subsidy, and throw out to the community what their thoughts are. Or they still think we should spend $300,000, or how much is that, pennies? In tax rate?
So about 261,000 for every penny for fiscal year 19. If
Okay.
our assessable base does the
Understand.
2% growth.
And you know, and Kristen has brought it up before, and I think he's done it very accurately. There may be a whole lot of people say, you mean, it's just depending on the tax rate to keep the golf course open? Okay, we should keep it open. Just like when people suddenly find out that I think 80% of our personnel expenses are public safety, or 80% of the general fund money.
Property tax collection.
Yeah, so I think these are viable discussions to have, though, especially when we get down to the budget and nobody wants to raise taxes, and then you start looking at where you're gonna cut, and it becomes difficult, especially when you look at the sheet you gave us, where 1.4 million, as I understand it, of that 2.8 million are employee wages. I mean, so just, that's 1.4 million right there, that you aren't, I don't know that we're gonna be able to cut that.
It's $15 a year is what it costs the average taxpayer to have the golf course open. That's what it costs, $15.
And I think, Kristen, I think,
put it in those- I
as
just
you've
put it in
said
those-
in the past, that I think it's real important that it get put in those terms for people, to understand what things cost.
I mean, at the end of the day, we'd be better off to turn it into meeting our stormwater management regulatory requirements and be done with that, right? That would make up a huge chunk of that obligation.
So, that's all I'm saying, it's food for thought.
Just mentioning again, that the official funding requests we've had so far, one is the Maryland Theater, another Museum of Fine Arts. I do recall that the Discovery Station did come in and they requested some additional funding and/or in-kind services for us towards their routine operations. I wasn't able to include any additional funding at this time. Now, that does not mean that, if I come in March and this is where I've got the allocations, if we decide to take from some of these other areas, to give money to the Discovery Station, certainly. Right now, I did not.
I think that it would be nice of us if there is like that 10,000 unallocated or something to give to them, 'cause they do bring a ton of foot traffic downtown. And their numbers have gone up drastically over the last 2 years. They've done a lot of promotion and a lot of things for the young kids in this area. They subsidize a lot of different things, and they just bring a lot of foot traffic downtown and are huge proponents of Hagerstown and the urban improvement project and downtown in general, so it'd be nice if we could do something.
And right now, for fiscal year 19, I moved it out of unassigned and put it towards Washington County Art Museum because I don't want to say first come, first serve, but it was easier for me to do first come, first serve and let the will of this, because those are conversations you're going to have.
I would also propose that every year, there is a yearly luncheon at the library and a yearly luncheon at the museum. And I would strongly encourage everybody to go to those. You will find out from them where their money goes, and especially with the library, the tens of thousands, if not more, of people that are serviced. So we have a lot of look in there because everybody wants money. We finally broke it down. There used to be a long list, and we would spend more time trying to figure out how to spend $50,000 than we spent on figuring out how to spend $50 million. And so we got down to there. The only thing that I would say is the one group on there that may be the most important group of all, but it's the only group that I'm aware of that has a pretty nice reserve fund themselves, and that's CRS, who 20 years ago, we decided that they needed to have financial support from us, and we started out with 50,000. And I just reiterate that CRS has a reserve fund. They're not trying to figure out how to pay their bills tomorrow. So I would note if that's a place to look at. And for my own speaking, I would indicate the place that I wouldn't take a nickel from, and that's the Hagerstown Municipal Band. That's just me talking.
I agree.
And I realize I went over my allotted time, so, I mean, that, again, it's a lot of information for just a snapshot of where we are right now. And again, we'll walk through, when I come back at the end of March, actually beginning of April, some of the things that might have changed in order for us to balance. Did you have any specific questions?
Are
It's
these-
a lot.
Are these numbers that are showing deficit on the revenue side on this chart, are they snapshot in time as it applies to total you expect for the year, or snapshot in time as you expect your estimate to come in based on what you have now?
So some of these
Like
revenues.
license and permits, as just an example.
So licensing and permits, we're gonna take another look at. We had another thought when there, but on our licensing and permits, some of those, are done every 2 years. So again, some of that is the nature of the cycle and things that we've already looked at that's not gonna recur. The grant side, the reason why it's reducing is because we had 3 different, basically cops hiring grants. And so as those grant, and they're federal, and each year it's on a declining basis. So, most of them are simply just a result of.
But
It's
are these
reality.
figures an estimate of the total year based on where you're at? Or are they
Yes.
an estimate of where you're at right now compared to what you budgeted?
No.
No, their estimate
Okay.
of
Based
the
on-
projection for the full
Okay.
fiscal
Correct.
year 19.
And they may change a little bit. Again, service charges, license and permits, because we just, we're looking at something a little different. And
We're
then
losing
the transfers from the other
state
funds. The
and
reason the
taxes.
transfer from the other fund is so
Pardon me?
much of a swing is because in fiscal year 18 budget, for the first time ever, we were able to move monies out of the health insurance fund because of their surplus and provide that back to the general fund and the other funds. It's a proration. It's possible that we could do that again in fiscal year 19, depending on our new
No,
fund
I-
balance policy, but
I have to point out, once again, and I don't know how else to say this, except that, our wages and benefits are outpacing our property tax revenue.
yes.
Year in and year out, they are. And we're gonna see it again this year, $1.2 million in property tax revenue, and the increase in wage and benefits estimate's $1.4 million. There's no way you can sustain a stable budget operating in that manner. There just isn't. And so, the only way you can do it is to continue to increase taxes.
Michelle, under the state and county shared taxes, the decrease of 10,000, what is that attributed to?
So in looking at, I think the majority of that was on the emissions and amusement tax side, and looking at where our current trends really are. They're lower than last fiscal year, in fiscal year 17. So based on our current trends, it's just looking at where we think we're gonna be with that for fiscal year 19. So unless something changes, unless some new company would open up that's charging emissions and amusement tax that we would get, or in the event that one of these companies that currently do would suddenly have, resurgence in their business. But
Okay.
And I did not increase hotel motel tax because the reality of it, even, lodging is at an increase. Our allocated share that we receive hasn't fluctuated. It's where it always is, and that's less than half a penny. Put it in those terms.
Well, thank you, Little Miss Sunshine.
Well, you're welcome. So now you know how happy I'm gonna be over the next couple weeks, right?
But you will have a balanced budget by the
March
end of-
31st.
You will do it.
That's right.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, Michelle.
All right, Rodney. Loan request to replace a Zamboni ice resurfacer. After that discussion.
Paul Sweeney's with me. He's the chair of the Hagerstown Ice Amateur Athletic Association, HIAAA, who's been running the rink for the last almost 40 years. Dan is also here. Dan is the man. He is the guy that maintains the rink, and the rink is a complicated operation with the ice-making equipment, the resurfacer, different things there that Dan takes care of and has really been doing a great job. I can attest personally that the HIAAA has put a lot of effort and investment of their own revenue into the rink, making improvements to the ice-making equipment, making improvements to the building, like finishing the locker rooms, the operating systems of how they do business there, their computer system. They've invested a lot in those things to keep the rink in the best shape possible. And because they run it like a business, I think the board is seeing that the ice resurfacer, which picture of it there in the memo, is coming to the end of its useful life. So it's prudent to figure out a way to replace that, because you're in the business of selling ice, smooth ice, and if you don't have smooth ice, you don't have anything. So we need to figure out a way to get this 20-year-old piece of equipment replaced. So I asked Paul to come in and go over his proposal.
All right. Again, thanks for having us out here again. It was an interesting conversation you had before about the golf course. You know, the ice rink is also a form of recreation which is very important to any kind of community at all. There's a lot of kids that are involved with the ice rink, whether playing hockey or figure skating, and keeps them out of trouble. So anytime you have, you know, those types of things available, makes things much better for the community. The resurfacer that we're talking about is actually more than 20 years old. It was, we've had it at the rink since 1997. We believe it was probably a used Zamboni when we got it. And we've spent an awful lot of time and efforts repairing it, and it really is on its last legs. It's in a tough situation. So Zambonis are not like used cars. You can't go to the Zamboni lot and pick up a new Zamboni. It's very, very difficult to find them. They're really specialized equipment. And we explored the option of maybe trying to find a used Zamboni, but there's really not a whole lot out there. And our Zamboni has about almost 8,000 hours on it right now. And even if you find a used one, they're all in the 4,000 to 5,000 hour range. So it doesn't make sense to get a used one. New ones are all over the place price-wise. Zamboni, there's also another company called Olympia that makes ice resurfacing machines. Zamboni is a little bit more cost-effective, but we've come to the realization that we need to get a new Zamboni, and the cost for a Zamboni is about $120,000, the one that we need to get. We're under the current agreement that we have with the city, we're under contract with you through April of 2019. So if we purchase a Zamboni, we're going to have to do some sort of financing with that. And our concern is that since our contract only goes through April of 2019, and we hope very much that you renew that contract with us, but we don't want to obligate ourselves beyond that particular date. We don't want to purchase a Zamboni that we would be responsible for paying for. It wouldn't be prudent for us as a board to make that decision. So what we'd like to do, what we're asking you to do, is to be the financing source for that particular Zamboni. We're going to come up with $25,000, maybe more than that. We have some fundraising ideas in place. But a Zamboni is not something, again, that you go down and pick up at the neighborhood used car lot. It takes about 7 to, how long?
It's about 12 months.
It could be as long as 12 months to actually, once you order one, to actually have it in place. If we purchase it through the city, the company that we're working through is willing to accept a purchase order as in lieu of having a down payment. So if we produce the purchase order, then we have, plenty of time to kind of come up with a down payment, beyond what we already have, set aside. So we don't know exactly how long it's going to take to get it, but again, we have enough for probably the 25%, about 20% right now, and we're going to produce a lot more from this point forward. So that's what we're here asking for.
And just from a historical perspective for everybody, first of all, we just talked about the amount we subsidize the golf course. So can you explain how much the city subsidizes the ice rink today?
Sure. The city subsidizes all the utility bills for us that we monitor. Everything else we're paying for ourselves. We haven't really asked the city for any sort of monies since I've been involved with the rink since 2007.
And Paul says that since he's been involved with the rink. I just want to make sure you all understand that this group came in when?
Well,
2014, and took a very, very troubled ice rink that was not doing well, that had splinter groups, that some of them at the point of saying, you people don't even deserve an ice rink, would rather you close it down than have it. And it was a horrible situation. We were having to subsidize financially. They had issues. This group came in, took all the user groups that were fighting with each other, unified them under one group, under one board, turned a dysfunctional group, along with the help of the Washington County Mediation Association, turned a dysfunctional organization into a highly functional organization that, as you're hearing, is not subsidized by the city at all, except for utility payments. And you're here asking us for a loan, you're not asking us for a grant.
Exactly.
Which is a whole different ballgame, and our experience with them is that they have lived up to every single statement they made to us, and I can't conceive of us not renewing their lease agreement. It would be the most foolish thing we could ever do.
Yeah, and we also are in a phase where we're paying a monthly rent. We're paying $3,000 a month to the city, so which helps offset those costs at this point too. So.
What are the lease options for example?
You asked that question. I actually have that information. These are, I'm not sure these numbers are still valid, but if we came up with 25,000 down, it's roughly, we'd be financing 100,000. These are all rough numbers, but a 60-month lease would be around $2,500 a month. 48-month lease would be around $3,000 a month. 36 months would be $3,912. We have budgeted a payment schedule where we think we can budget about $3,000 a month towards the cost of that. So if it takes, again, if the city would do the purchase order, that gives us another 12 months to accumulate even more money. So we probably would, if it took that long to get to Zamboni, we'd probably have closer to $40,000 to $50,000 that we could put down on it. So we'd be financing actually even less. We wouldn't have to have the finance agreement actually, I guess we'd have to have it in place, but we wouldn't have to actually start. We wouldn't have a need for the money until the Zamboni was delivered.
If we extended your agreement, would you be able to get a loan from another source?
We've talked about that. That would make us feel much more comfortable about doing that, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's the real stumbling block right now, the uncertainty of the future.
Yeah.
No, that's pretty simple.
Yeah, and we want to, continue
Yeah, that
managing
should be
the
real
rent. So.
simple. I can't imagine. So what we need to find out is what they need and bring it back to us.
What we're primarily asking for now, though, is if we can, in order to start the process, we have to come up with some sort of an order for the Zamboni, because it's, again, it's going to be, hopefully, it would only be 8 or 9 months, but it could be as long as 12 months. So the Zamboni that we have now, I mean, we're
Mayor, I'm agreeable to say yes.
Yes to what's originally proposed?
Yes, to getting that purchase order. I think based upon the history that we have with this group, that what they're asking for is get this thing started, and we're gonna have at least 6 to 7 months to figure out exactly what they need, whether it's actual financing, or just the extension of the agreement? And I imagine the extension of the agreement we could do real quick. I can't imagine there's anybody who's opposed to that. So we just need to find out how long the agreement needs to be extended to for them to try to get financing. And then if they can't get financing privately, then we can deal with that aspect of it.
Yeah, I agree. In the meantime, if the current Zamboni tanks, what are your options?
Don't have a whole lot, that is, with the ice, I mean, Dan could
Basically,
probably answer
right
that
now is
better.
do exactly what I can to keep it running. If not, I have a couple other rinks that, a small emergency base, I might be able to use a resurfacer, but it wouldn't be no more than a couple week time.
Okay.
Paul, just out of curiosity, change the subject. I keep waiting for this grand opening with the Capitals out of the inline rink. Do you have any idea? what's
I don't
going
know,
on?
I mean,
Pete's been in constant contact with them. They've seemed to just kind of lost interest, I guess. we'll say,
Really?
Temporarily.
I mean, they came in and did the surfacing like that.
Did what they
and then
promised,
right-
except for the scoreboard, but
Yeah.
we can't seem to get them to come back up.
kind of like on that note, one more quick thing. I don't know if I should hand these out to everybody or, we have an event coming up. It's called Try Hockey Free Day. It's actually March the 3rd. It's to promote youth participation, and it's going to be on March the 3rd. That's Saturday morning from 8 to 10. We'd love to have all of you come out and see what we got going on at that place. So,
Highly recommend it.
I just want to say while you're here, second, Lou, what Lou said. I grew up in that ice rink. I don't know if you know this. If you go back to the photos of the grand opening, I was the awkward girl with braces and a ponytail that did the figure skating on the grand opening day. So I was kind of there and coached up until recently through the dysfunction of the ice rink. You guys have really done a great job, so thank you. Because as someone who grew up in that ice rink and figure skating instilled discipline in me, it is very, very important for children to do activities like
Oh, yeah.
hockey, skating, whatever it may be.
yeah, we're
But-
committed to that, so we
Yes.
want it to grow.
I
We've got
appreciate
some
what you guys
really
do.
exciting ideas that we're going to be presenting.
It's a wonderful drink. It's very nice.
We've got some really good ideas with some other things too that you're going to be hearing about, hopefully in the very near future as well.
So, I don't want to complicate it, but I guess we'll need to have some sort of quick agreement to iron out
To
some of the
agree.
details of
Yeah.
this and bring it back in for you all to vote on.
Okay,
Sounds great.
okay.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you very
Thanks.
much.
Excuse me, Rodney, one question. Do you know how much the utilities are currently?
They run about 75,000 a year.
Okay.
Their rent's about 35,000, so what we subsidize is around 40.
Okay.
All right, we're gonna discuss the tiered real property tax structure.
All right, hi, everybody.
Hello, Scott.
Was here back in November just to provide kind of a very, very general peek at what a tiered tax rate may look like. Gave some preliminary information based upon the FY18 assessments. What I have in your packet is some more data for you that I hope that will provide you enough information that you can generate your own questions based upon the data that's provided. I'd like to step down through, and the first thing, I apologize for a couple of these being in such small print, you probably needed a magnifying glass. But yeah, for all the young people, it's fine, we have glasses to use. But I was afraid to split it up too much because I was afraid it would be confusing. But if you look at the first sheet, this is one of the sheets I went by, one of the first two sheets, ones I went by the first time in November to kind of provide an overall view of what particular increases per class, tax class, would do as far as revenue enhancements. The first sheet are tier increases of 5% to 15%. For all classifications, the first part of that chart is for all classifications that are non-owner occupied parcels. Apartments, which are 4 units or more, residential commercial, which are parcels that are residents, but a portion of it are primarily residents, but they have a commercial component to them. Of course, residential, townhouses, residential condos, commercial residences, agriculture, country club, industrial. So this first sheet shows the increases if you tiered it 5%, from 5% to 15%, and what the revenue would generate based upon those increases. You see that under any owner-occupied part of a class, which only involved residential, townhouse, and residential condo, there were no rate changes calculated for those. The bottom part of the sheet for both the first and second pages dealt with owner-occupied versus non-owner-occupied residential type classes only. Again, owner-occupied, there was no rate changes, but with non-owner occupied residences, again, you see what happens if it's raised 5%, 10%, 15% on the second page, 20% and 25%. So that'll give you, that should give you the information there. And you can mix and match those any way you want. You can use these numbers because they're based on assessment. If you look at the third page, it's a map, and what that map shows you are the SDAT parcel prefix classifications within the city. We have 5 separate prefixes for parcels within the city. 03, and it's just 3 there, but it comes out 03. 17, 21, 22, 25. For those of us that live in the south end, there's 3 of us that have what would start with 03 parcel numbers. 03 and then 5 more digits after that. The page after that, what I did was basically randomly grabbed a parcel in each of these parcel locations that had that were of the apartment class, 4 or more units within a particular parcel. Whether it was 4 to 8, I stopped at 8, and saw what a 5% incremental increase would result in based upon those number of units within that parcel. Parcels can be 1 for a single family house, or they could be upwards of 12, 22, whatever is composed within that parcel, the number of living units or number of segments of that parcel. So, and I've got a PowerPoint. I know the mayor hates it when I don't come up here without a PowerPoint for him to see. I do have a PowerPoint that will show that standard increase, the standard calculation that works for any type of a parcel when a tax is calculated. And I think a lot of people don't understand how a city tax charge is calculated, and I'll show that here in just a second. But this shows that, and we'll just grab one. Let's grab in the 03 prefix area, which is the southwest corner of the city. Let's say 6 units. We'll use that one. FY18 assessment was $301,600 for this particular parcel. This parcel paid $2,838.06 this year in taxes at 94.1 cents. If there was a 5% increase, we raised that tax from 94.1 to 98.8. For that unit, that tax bill now becomes $2,979.81, an increase of $141.75 a year. Divide that by 12, and I don't have that number actually in front of me, but if you divide that number by 12, that's the monthly increase. Well, that would be, well, then you'd have to divide that number.
$140 divided by 12, about 14
Divided by
bucks, divided by 4
Divided by
people.
6.
Well, divided by 6 in this,
Oh,
in this
6 of them.
case. I'm using the 6 unit
So 2
example.
1/4 a person a month.
It's $295 a person a month.
So in this case, in one of the most expensive units, the worst-case scenario with a 25% tax increase would result in an increase of $10 a month.
$10.01, yes, $10.01.
Not
For this
$200
particular
a
one,
month.
for this particular one.
And that's the most expensive one on the list.
Yes.
That I have on the list, right. And you can do this with, any parcel you want, as long as you have the assessment amount.
I just thought that was important to clarify, that
Right.
it was not $200 a month. It was
No, not in this-
$10.01 a month.
And I think it should be, I think it's important to also discuss it in the context of why this conversation was created, meaning that owner-occupied units make up about 40% of the total tax base, but they pay about $2 million more a year in actual property taxes.
That's correct.
Than non-owner occupied.
That's correct.
And, you know, even though those units are, you know, a smaller percentage, and they're obviously not, for large part, you know, folks aren't buying these, you know, as a for-profit sort of investment purpose. And I took one just like that and applied that same percentage, and I think in this case, it was the one down here that's assessed the same amount as my home is, and both of them would increase by $81 for the year. But in my case, my particular case, I pay that full $81. You know what I mean? It isn't split, and I think in that one, it's 7 residential and 1 commercial, so it's a total of 8 units, you know, and then they get to split that $81 among those number of units.
Right.
Whereas that homeowner absorbs that entire cost, and, you know, and like it or not, you know, and I look at you two across the table, because where those assessment increases hit the most is in those larger neighborhoods in the north end that have traditionally seen those assessment increases hit. And so that percentage goes up exponentially more, you know, as you move into those areas, and that differential becomes even greater between those neighborhoods which are largely owner-occupied and those areas that are not.
Right.
And also, I think, with the brouhaha about the per unit because of the new email flaps we're getting about how much it's going to cost tenants,
Fake news.
I just want everybody to know, last I saw, I think almost every tenant in the city has a written lease. And I'm not so sure that I remember any lease that says, by the way, when my taxes go up, your rent goes up.
Right.
Now, when their lease is up, well, that's a different story, but this theory that if we do this, that suddenly the landlords are telling their tenants that you're gonna face an immediate, huge rent increase is just, take a look at your written lease.
The last couple spreadsheets here that I provided, 2 of the pages show average and median increases of tax bills for major non-owner occupied residential classes, apartments, commercial, residential, industrial, commercial condo. And the average and median tax bill and increase, and why I use median, not medians, I'm not a fan of average of anything because of the large highs and lows you can get that skew the number. The median is more the middle value of what you would see an increase of. If you just look at under apartments, we have 415 parcels that are apartments. At a 5% increase, the average bill would increase for one parcel $253.98. The median tax bill would only increase $91.23. So that would be across all of apartments, the ones that are at $15 million assessed to the ones that are at $150,000 assessed. So I like to show a median range instead of an average range just to cut down on that wide skew of numbers. The last page I have was a comparison of, not a comparison, but an explanation of owner-occupied versus non-owner-occupied residential, where we would increase non-owner occupieds, but potentially decrease the tax rate for owner-occupied residentials. And what it shows here, and I did that the same as I, set it up the same as I did on the first couple sheets, where first is owner-occupied, non-owner occupied, and then it goes owner-occupied, everybody, everything else, including commercial. If you would look to raise revenue let's go to the top part of it, raise it 5% on non-owner occupied residences and drop it 5% on the owner occupied, we would lose $102,000 of tax revenue. If we decided to raise 10% on non-owner occupieds and drop 10% on owner occupieds, we lose $169,000. But if we raise 10% on non-owner, drop 5% on owner occupied, we gain $263,006. And again, you can do anything you want. Throw these in a spreadsheet. You can come up with any number you want to based upon what I have here. If you drop all the commercials and the industrial in, that's at the bottom of the page. A 5 up, 5 down would give you 328.9. A 10 up, 10 down, 738, 862 increase in revenue. A 10 up, 5 down, 1.1 million.
So in that one, you're saying 10% on commercial and apartments?
Yes.
And 5% on homeowner?
On only owner occupied.
Right, okay.
Right.
And residential commercial?
Yes. That are not owner occupied. Okay.
And I just want to say, for one, I would be opposed at a rate increase for commercial. I think that,
Commercial, non-residential.
right, commercial, non-residential.
We're on
I-
the same page.
I think when we're trying to encourage downtown and we're getting ready for the urban improvement project, you tell commercial we're gonna raise.
Right. And there are, to be fair and balanced, which I hate to say, hate to use that term, but to be fair and balanced, you will find, just as you will with anything, a number of studies that say you raise the tax rate, assessments will drop. There are definitely studies out there that show raising the tax rate on parcels that are non-owner occupied will cause assessments to drop. Some significantly, some not so significantly. By the same token, you'll also find studies that say that if you raise the tax rate and a resident finds that the services that are getting the benefit of that additional revenue that's being generated, that ends up increasing assessments, and it keeps people in those parcels. You'll also hear those that are capable of absorbing the rent will absorb it. Those that aren't may see that, hey, I could buy a house instead of paying this rent. I could probably pay less than a mortgage than I'm paying in rent, are going to go and look to buy a house, which, is a good thing. Not so much for the property owner, because they're losing a tenant and they've got to come in and find that rent somewhere. There are going to be those that you raise the rent, maybe they can't buy a house for whatever reason, credit or, just funds or whatever. They're going to be the ones that are going to have to take that additional rent and absorb it somehow. And those are the ones that, quote unquote, could be hurt by that.
But you're talking about in the context of these numbers,
Right.
$5 a month.
Right.
per year.
Absolutely.
That I think is a good average number to use.
Absolutely.
Across the board.
You're right.
Is best case, worst case, highest, lowest assessed, scenario, you're talking roughly $5 a month a year.
Right. And I don't disagree with that, absolutely. One last thing, I just want to, and I do this for the benefit of everybody here, not to make any, just to make this as clear as possible, to show you a couple slides on how this is calculated. How a tax bill is calculated for all city parcels. Doesn't matter if you're a single-family homeowner or you live in an apartment building. The tax is calculated, assessed value times the tax rate equals what you're going to pay for taxes. The assessed value is the value of a residence for tax purposes, taking comparable home sales and inspections into consideration. Assessed value does not equal your market value in the predominance of times. Market value is what you could sell or buy a property for. Taxes are based on assessed value, not on market value. The city is in the first year, FY18, of a 3-year assessment cycle. In Maryland, in Maryland, properties are assessed every 3 years. The state is the assessment organization. The city does not assess property for tax purposes. The county doesn't do it. The state does it. You can see the assessment information for any parcel within the state of Maryland, particularly, obviously, in the city of Hagerstown, by going to the SDAT webpage that I have on this sheet, and we're going to put it up on the website. And then we're also going to produce a little mini video on how to look this information up, so you can see what your particular parcel is going to cost in taxes by applying our rate to it. In the example I want to give, our current tax rate is 94 cents. 94 cents out of every $100 of assessment is what is charged against your assessed value of your property. The example we're going to use is a 10% increase in the tax rate, which takes 94 cents to $1.04, okay? A 4-unit apartment in the 03 parcel district, South End, at $200,000. That is the assessed value according to the state. $200,000 times 0.00, and you have to take that hundreds out because it's cents to $100, times 0.00941 is $1,882. That is what you will get on the first couple of days of July in your mailbox as your tax bill that you owe. The same 4-unit at $200,000 with a 10% increase to 0.0104, a tax bill now becomes $2,080. Okay? So you go $2,080, the increase, minus your current $1,882, it's $198 per year. That's what your tax bill has increased. In this particular parcel, there are 4 units. 198 divided by 4 units, that yearly increase amounts to $49.50 per unit. Okay? You then divide that by 12, because there's 12 months of the year, you pay rent 12 months. That's a $4.13 per month per unit increase. All else being equal, the property tax on that parcel was increased by 10%. Takes nothing else into account except the city tax charge. That's a less than 1% increase in rent. If you pay $700 a month, less than 1% increase in rent based upon only a tax increase. We're going to put this up on the website. People can look at it. I'm sure there's going to be all kinds of holes tried to shot through it. And if, for the sake of discussion, it's a good thing. You want to discuss it? Well, let's discuss it. But that is the math. That is what is done to calculate a tax bill.
So you mean to tell me that at this formula here, if it was a 25% tax increase, that still wouldn't raise the monthly rent by $200?
Hang on.
It's on Facebook. It must be true.
No, well, no, Mayor, and I'll tell you. I'll tell you actually, real quick. At .03, at 25%, was it $200,000? About $9.
Yeah.
$9.70? $9.70 a month. That's what that amounts to. Yeah. And again,
So you have to
is
raise it 2,500% to get to that $1,000 figure.
yeah. I don't think it's anything you guys would want to discuss raising taxes to. But so that's the calculation. And that goes, if you're a homeowner, I'm a homeowner, that's how my tax bill is calculated. Mm-hmm. If I rent, that's how my landlord or property owner is calculating his tax charges. We're all the same.
Yep.
So if you have any other questions, you want any other information, you want to slice and dice this any other way, let me know. I'll be happy to generate it for you because we got all the information right here. We don't have the constant yield information yet. That won't come in for another couple weeks. Usually that's like a Valentine's present, I think,
Yeah.
for us.
Could be a present.
So we won't have that information yet. So that'll give us some good information on where things are going as far as the assessed value goes for the city. But that's the generic black and white version of how we do this.
And I would like to know, I guess, just generally, as I have to go back to balance that budget, what are the thoughts of this body in entertaining a tiered tax rate? Because I need to know that information as I build the budget.
I'm in favor of it, because, I mean, if you look at the, what the owner occupied house, that resident is paying, take the services they have nothing to do with that piece of property. Take two properties side by side, they're identical in every way. The property tax assessment is gonna be the same on both of those properties. One has 4 people in it, or 4 couples, one has 1 couple in it. That 1 couple is going to be paying a significant amount more for the services, the police, the fire, EMS, taking advantage of parks and recreation programs and everything, and garbage, municipal pickup. They're paying just such a tremendous amount more than the same couple in a rental unit. And we're trying to encourage home ownership. And why would you want to buy a house if the inequity is that great? You know, it just doesn't make any sense.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm for it.
And I would note that Austin's email, I guess, today was one of the more lengthy and very enlightening. I think it spoke very highly of why. My only issue is 2-tier tax system, which I understand. I think we need to make sure we're all on the same sheet of music of what the tiers are. And I think the one that it should be is the four units or more.
That's the apartments.
Right, but so that we're clear what we're talking about, we're not talking about duplexes, we're not even talking about triplexes.
That's correct. The apartment class is only 4 units or more. Anything less than 4 units, it could fall into townhouse, it could fall into residential commercial residential. It could fall into several of these different categories. But apartments are 4 units or more.
So if somebody, so what you're saying is you would be excluding, like if somebody owns a stick of 8 townhouses.
If those 8 townhouses are all one parcel, it would be an apartment.
Okay.
If those townhouses are each parcels.
I got you. Because you got developers out there that are building, and they end up retaining ownership of 40% of those townhouses.
No, and I understand.
That's correct.
My question becomes, how do you deal with that?
Well, how we deal with that is we are able to segment owner occupied versus non-owner occupied. Your house, your parcel would come up as obviously owner occupied. If you are renting a rancher type house, that will come up as a residential class, but it will show as non-owner occupied.
But I need you to clarify for them, because I want to make sure that
Right.
they understand, we're not just talking about 4 units or more on your charts. This is any non-owner occupied.
Well, there's
Right.
a couple charts.
It could be.
Well, there's a couple charts on there,
Right.
yes, there's a couple charts on there, and again, the way that those charts are set up, you can go through and you can pull out a particular line item that's residential, commercial, or if you'd like one of us to do it, we can certainly do that as well, depending on how you want to say. Like I said, you can slice this and dice this a bunch of ways.
And I would certainly, for instance, like some examples of residential commercial, where there's
Sure.
residential and commercial involved in the same thing.
Absolutely do that.
And I just want to make clear, I'm just expressing my own opinion when I mention the 4 units. I would love to be able to have a system in which, for instance, John Q. landlord owns 15 duplexes, separate lots. So
15 separate parcels.
15 separate parcels, but all owned by John landlord, who's in.
All right next to each other.
Yeah, who's in, well, even if they're not,
Even
even
if
if
they're
they're not, but we have a landlord who is in the real landlord business, not owning one duplex but
I got
owning
you.
15 units. That person, to me, is like an apartment building. But I don't know how you can get into that classification.
The only way you can do it, Councilman, is if the state provides us that information. We get a file in June, every June, that has all of our parcel information provided to us. If we can, if there is a separate distinction within each parcel record that will tell us something like what you're saying, we can do it.
I'd be interested if you can.
But we can't take, if it's five separate, if it's, I own 5 townhomes, and they're bang, 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 bang. They're each a separate parcel. I have to be able to distinguish, what is that class? Is that a townhouse? Is that a condo? How did SDAT classify it?
Right, and I think what you'd end up happening is you'd set a number, and then they would end up LLCing and.
That's right, which most do.
I guess for me, like, I don't care so much about that setup, because I think you have your good and your bad landlords in that regardless, and we address that through other provisions. What I don't like is when a developer comes in and says, hey, I'm gonna build this development, it's gonna have these townhouses, you're gonna get some owner occupied, and then the development gets done, and the developer keeps, 30 or 40% of the townhouses, and they just simply become rentals under another name.
Right.
That's the part that bothers me, because then you're sold this bill of goods that what you're getting is a development of home ownership, and you don't.
Right.
And so, the 60%, like it or not, the 60% of folks that buy into that, thinking that this, is a specific type of development, it ends up not being what they bought into. And then we're the people that have to wrestle with the issues that come along with that once the developer's
Right.
gone.
Is
That's
it
right.
fair to say that, that we all can start out at the base, that, is there anybody who disagrees that apartment complexes should be two-tiered? So, I mean, we may get
Should be
into it.
separated as a tier, as a
Right,
separate tier.
right, so, we may get into a discussion down the road about whether there's an agreement on.
You wanna add res-con, you want
Yeah,
residential
but,
com,
but I think we all agree that the apartments, 4 or more, absolutely, and then it's all gonna be interesting to hear from staff of the other alternatives, and when you
let's-
squeeze it, what happens with the balloon?
Let's take that thought and look at Scott's first sheet, his first spreadsheet. So, Councilman, what you're talking about, if you look at his bottom section of his chart on his first sheet, under non-owner occupied, his very first spreadsheet.
I got you. I got you.
Okay.
All right, everybody there? The non-owner occupied at the bottom of the page, the very M apartments, those are the ones that would be 4+.
Yes.
Okay? So if you go across his calculations, all right, the first column is the assessment, the next one is the tax
Current
rate.
tax rate.
The difference. So you're talking about, say we made a decision to go with the 5% increase, you would only be getting $105,000 there.
Well, I don't
okay?
think anybody's interested in a 5%
Okay, I
increase.
know, but, so I just want to make sure that we're all on the same
I
page.
understand.
So
We're only getting a 311 increase.
At
330 if you included all the other ones,
Like,
okay.
for me, if you came back and I just throw this out there, as I looked at this chart in my mind, if you came back and said you were at 15, 10, and -5 on this chart, that to me is a package that I think considers those variable issues. In other words, 15 on the apartments, 10% on non-owner occupied, and -5
on the residential,
owner
owner
occupied.
occupied.
Again, that to me is sort of like a package of where I think the tax structure needs to get to.
Better to be called
think
then
we
a
need to go one better
multi-tier
than
instead
that.
of a two-tier.
Well,
When
I know
you-
where you're headed to.
When you look at Cortlandt Park or places like that have I don't even know how many are there. I know Manor Drive is 418
Well,
units.
Manor Drive's Court Park is one of those instances where you have multiple units within the same parcel that are separated by segments, but it's all under the same parcel. So it's like 12, 12, 12, 12, like 15 times. Manor Drive has 418 units under one parcel, and it's like $10 million, 9.9 some million dollars of assessed value.
And when we looked at it yesterday, did we do 15% or did we do 25?
I can't remember.
Anyway, it equated to $1.96 a month.
Yeah, $1.98 a month.
Increase in rent to cover that tax.
Mayor, I believe it's 10%. I believe we just
It
did
was 10?
10%.
I can't remember, it was yesterday.
Yeah, it's the same with me.
There's so many numbers floating around.
So
But
20% would be $2.
I'm just wondering, do we do, just like we would do a 10% non-owner occupied and a 5% negative to owner occupied and reduce our taxes? Do we do that same kind of formula kind of on, an increase on those big units who use a lot of our services such as fire and police?
Aren't they part of the over 4 units?
They will be over the 4, but if, I'll put it to you this way. If I have 5 units, but my tax is now increasing where I've got to increase my rent on 5 units by $4.71 a month, but Manor Drive, who has 418 units.
So you're talking about doing a different increase for large complexes?
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, that you
know.
can't do,
Yeah, no,
because
it's
that's
too
not how
much.
this,
Well,
that's not how the state
and I think the
segments it.
premise then gets a little lost. I mean, the premise is you've got higher density, higher occupation per that service delivery, which is, I think, the nexus that you're trying to get to.
Right.
That's why I think you do that package, and I know you want to be at that 25. Even if, like I said, if you can go back and you said 2010 -5.
Right.
I think that it encourages those ownership dynamics that you're trying to encourage, because let's face it, folks go out there and they look at that house and go, man, the taxes on this single-family home are there's just too
Well,
much. So you're trying to reverse that course.
Just let me throw this out. For every 5% that you would decide to reduce owner-occupieds, you're losing about $430-some thousand of revenue.
Well, at some point, you've got to change that course.
You do. That's understood.
Right,
I'm
and
just
I think
throwing
the-
that out as a sheer number.
And I think that, I'm really like hearing the prospect of actually decreasing taxes on owner occupied. I suspect that what we're dealing with is relative increases. I'll be amazed if we can come up with figures that allow us not to increase owner occupied. I'd be happy as can be. That would surprise me if that happens.
Right, you have the
I
number.
think also that it's great to promote home ownership, but we need to keep in mind that that number's not gonna flip. Younger people are not buying houses. I mean, the reality of it is, we're never gonna be 40 rental, 60 homeowner, no matter how hard we try to promote it. I mean, I think it's still important, I just think we need to realize that.
Tendency
Millennials are
across the
not-
nation is to rent.
Yeah, people aren't buying houses.
Unless you look to begin, instead of an opportunity where you would normally rent a condo type space or a loft space, you would sell it. And, I mean, and how many millennials at this point, I think of my son, there's no way in creation he could buy a house right now. But he has to rent.
Right.
But there may be some to where it may change from a dynamic of a building that's 60-40 rent to own. It could flip it to 60 own, 40 rent if they wanted to do it that way. There's so many factors involved in that decision for a developer. You just don't know. You don't know how it falls.
So 2010 -5 would net you 450.
450,000.
That's what it would be.
Right.
Two pennies on the tax rate.
Yeah. And
2010 -5 would net you 2 cents on the tax rate.
I think we're gonna
20%
need more than 2 cents.
increase. Now, when you say that, do you mean on just the M's?
So you're going
or
20 on the
you mean all
the
the-
apartments,
Commercial.
10% on the remaining non-owner
That's what I was
occupieds,
doing.
and the 5 decrease in the owner occupied.
Yes.
And he said he did not include commercial.
Did not include
so-
commercial.
And no commercial industrial,
But all categories of non-owner occupied.
I'm with Lou though about the commercial, I don't.
Yeah, that's what we were saying, no commercial. I agree too.
And I think, I'm hoping what you're looking for is something very preliminary, so that.
Oh, sure, I'm
One
just,
day we're gonna
And
get
I
the
have to,
budget, we're gonna
I
look
have
at
to
these.
systematically know if we can do that. I'm pretty sure we can, but now I have to systematically look and see if I'm drilling down class to owner, class and then to owner occupied, that I can do that and still produce a tax bill.
Right.
So, I can do, that's not hard to do.
Okay, you got your work cut out.
Good job, thanks.
thank you. Thank you, Scott.
North-South basketball tonight.
Very good.
Go Rebels. Go Rebels.
Go Rebels, that's right.
One of these years, we're gonna get.
Any North
that
High
laid
people
out
here?
ERCC, right?
Yes, we are.
Before we're dead.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
I know a guy.
Did you go to
I'm always
school?
interested in
I
how
know a
long-
guy.
Shelley?
So there's a North High fan.
I was going to ask you, where'd you go?
Where?
I'm a river rat. Well, I am.
Get out.
Imagine that, yeah. All right, we're gonna kick off and let, our city administrator give us a comment.
Nothing additional, just thank you for listening through 2 heavy topics tonight, and please don't hesitate to call if you have any questions on that, but, so staff will go back to the drawing board and, get you a balanced budget by the end of March.
Shelley,
That's all, thank you.
got anything?
Just something a little lighter than budgeting and taxes, I think. I had the privilege of meeting with a Boy Scout who wanted his merit badge, his civic merit badge. So that was really exciting, but it got me thinking. We say the Pledge of Allegiance at our open sessions, the regular sessions, and I don't know how we could do this, how we would select, but to have maybe youth, Boy Scout groups, Girl Scout groups coming in on a regular basis to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I just think that it would encourage youth civic engagement. Just a thought that I had to, maybe inviting him at least to start and then kind of following suit. So thought it'd be a good idea.
Yeah, I like that.
Thanks. Yeah,
Is that it?
that's it.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks. Luke?
Apologize for missing executive session. It's good to have 5 council members here.
Yeah. Mr. Heffernan?
I just had one item for my concerned citizen today. Does anybody know anything about a cell phone tower being built in North High?
My first indication was yesterday on Facebook.
Really?
That was the first time that I heard about it, so.
So then,
Okay, so we need to look into that.
I hadn't either, I just was
At North High?
Yeah, supposedly going on in one of the lower fields of North High, 100-foot tower.
150-foot tower.
150.
Yeah.
My guess is if it's going there, then they already have some kind of a lease option done with
They
the Board of
probably
Ed
do,
and
yeah.
out of our purview, but, I don't,
Supposedly, there's some kind of meeting at the Legion Tuesday night next week. So. That's tall. Well, that's the
I
thing,
think
that
if
was
that's
their.
the case, we should send some communication that it either is or isn't permissible by zoning.
yeah.
You know,
Oh,
just-
yeah, well, right.
The
Well, you'd think we
concerns-
would've been notified
That's what
anyway
I'm saying, I mean,
prior to
The
this.
concerns stated were that they had some attachments of German studies that basically the health impacts of living that close to a tower, not to mention the walking out your front door and seeing this thing in front of you.
I'd be able to see from my house.
You probably would, yeah.
That it,
That's it.
Kristen?
I have 2 items. The first is, we talked about the tax structure this evening, and I keep going back to this scenario. We're not talking about any one of these items in a vacuum. We have a very complex budget that has some dynamic revenue and expense constraints. And so I don't see this, and I know this will be, covering the headlines for the next week, and folks will have all kinds of opinions about it, but it's no different than when we talk about the stormwater management fee, or any other of the items, even the golf course issue this evening. The objective for me, and one I brought up a couple years back, was the public utility tax, which some jurisdictions charge utilities a separate tax than what property tax and commercial tax is. And that's one I'd like to revisit at some point in the future, but one at a time. And for me, it's about, creating the appropriate tax structure for that service delivery that we're obligated to provide. And I think it went a little bit to your comments to the one post and to your email. It isn't like we're doing any one of these items as some sort of silver bullet to fix our budget holes. It's the fact that we look at the budget, we look at the services we're providing, we look at the revenues that we collect to provide those services, and we need to, at least I think to the degree appropriate, make sure that those costs are being applied to everyone in as equitable manner as possible. And that's why when we talk about the stormwater management fee, I know folks, hear rain tax, but the reality is, if you don't go that route, then roughly 75% of the property owners are picking up the cost of 100% of the properties in this city for that item we're mandated and obligated to provide a service to. And so I just think we got to keep it in that context as we look at each one of these and we get, varying degrees of public pushback on them.
I think the transparency of, like Scott was saying, putting that up on the website.
Oh, yeah.
Increasing the understanding of the general citizenry out there as to, we had the example, somebody would say, well, the city should just buy $120,000 Zamboni and be done with it. Well, what does that mean in terms of a property tax increase to be able to do that?
Half penny.
The second issue is in regard to the ESAC committee, which you guys, so justly appointed me to after the county invited me to attend many months ago, maybe a year ago now, and so I've been sort of diligently, as possible, attending the meetings and participating in those discussions, which are sort of a conglomerate of partners among local public safety, meaning the County Fire Association, the city fire department, and Chief, I'll lean on you here in a second if I get anything wrong, the director of the county's emergency services, and a number of what I'll call community representatives and company representatives, sort of countywide, that attend and sort of share in this directive of, how are we going to approach and resolve our public safety and largely fire and emergency services response over, the near future. And one of the things that's occurred as part of that is, if you recall, they were putting out this study that they were going to do, and there'd be this analysis of the system, and they hired a consultant, and the consultant's report, I think, is on its third or fourth iteration. I can tell you I haven't seen that. It hasn't been released to the ESAC members. I'm not an actual member of ESAC. I'm not sure what capacity I was serving in. As our conversations, I think, and discussions and opinions on the various matters have intensified, over the various issues. One of the things that was sort of a revelation at the meeting the other night, unbeknownst to myself and most of the others in attendance, was that even in spite of all of the misgivings of this draft report that everybody that has seen it says is a completely deficient document produced by the deficiencies of the contractor that was hired to do it, even in spite of that, one thing that has come out of it, apparently for sure at this point, is that the city and its fire system shouldn't be included in the analysis of how we're going to provide fire and rescue services over the next 20 years. Now, I don't know how you do that with any level of integrity and competence, given the percentage of that service delivery that our companies provide into that system. The other revelation that came out of that meeting was apparently there was a meeting called by someone, no one knows who at this point, who called the meeting
among the county administrator, the county attorneys, the association president, the association's attorneys, and I guess the current facilitator of the group, I believe is Kingsley. And unbeknownst to any of the members, the meeting was called, and one of the tenets that came out of that meeting, besides the fact that the city shouldn't be included in whatever this plan is that may or may not ever, be submitted for public review so we can actually figure out what's deficient about it, is that those members that aren't members of the ESAC that attend the ESAC meetings shouldn't participate in the meetings unless the members assert that they want to hear from those non-members at the meetings. Now, I'm not a dumb person. I can read between the lines. Guys like me that show up, and no offense, ladies like yourselves that may show up that want to assert an opinion on a matter, are going to do so. And so when I go, I expect to participate. I expect to provide input. I expect to get in tough conversations and have tough questions, and that we all come out of there with the same basic premise that what we're trying to do are find long-term solutions to an immediate problem. And I think I've said it real clear in the last couple meetings we had here in public session on the very own matters that our chief presented. I think I said it real clear here in public session when Director Hayes came in and spoke, and by the way, I have all the respect in the world for Director Hayes, but we all have bosses, and I understand that. And so, I just sent out an email after the meeting, after myself, and I think a number of people were sort of flabbergasted at sort of, that such a meeting occurred and how things sort of were shaking out, so to speak, that I just said, I want to be involved, I want to participate. But if the city's not in the report and they don't want to hear from me as whatever I am, I got much better things to do. And it's not that I don't want to solve the issues that I've been, beating on the door since 2008 when I was county commissioner, saying, hey, the fire system is the 800-pound gorilla in the county's room that has to be resolved. And it remains that today. And we haven't gotten any further in 2018 than we were in 2008 when I was beating on that same door. And now to be, asked to be part of this group to look at the issue and find those resolutions and feel like something's moving forward to that degree, to be said, you know what, if you could just sit in the corner and be quiet, that'd be great. I just don't operate like that, and I have no interest in attending any more of those meetings or serving in whatever non-capacity I was serving in. And so anyone else at the table that has an interest in attending those meetings, I would encourage you to take my place, because I don't function well when folks have secret meetings to make those types of decisions behind the backs of those folks that are volunteering their time to show up at every one of these companies' meetings every month to say, you know what, we don't want your opinion after all. So, well.
I mean, I gotta be, doesn't sound very fun.
Welcome to the politics that occur at the county from time to time.
Is that it?
Yep.
Okay. Emily?
I don't have anything other than it is nice to have 5 council members again. I think now that we actually have 5, we need to do some goal setting like ASAP. So maybe we could start via email, but this body has a little under 3 years left, and it would be nice to have some concrete direction on what the 5 of us would like to accomplish in these next 3 years. And I would like to think we should do that sooner than later.
Mm-hmm. Without a doubt.
Yeah. That's all.
Got it? Okay. Mine's going to be a little bit more lighthearted also. Attended the 4th grade class at Salem Avenue today for If I Were Mayor contest. Good group of kids, all great ideas. Look forward to seeing their essays as they come in, and hopefully at least one from Washington County, as did last year, will end up in Annapolis because of their essay. So, and that is all that I have. So until next week, we're adjourned.